Hello and welcome to another edition of the Osteopathic Lyceum podcast. Today I'm going to attempt to do something that's different than I often do, and I want to do it with the utmost respect, or at least the attempt at the utmost respect. So, a student who is at the school ended up having some questions about some very, very specific things with respect to how osteopathy has developed in Southern Ontario, or in Ontario in general, and to some degree that would relate to some of the development in the other provinces, as well as the connection to practitioners from other countries. Now, it's really two countries. We're talking about America and the UK, because there's been some stuff that has occurred over time in relationships, and those relationships have formed some of the practitioners and some of the educators and the things that they talk about. So the particular student knows a decent amount. They've had some experience, they know a variety of people, and they found insight into the information valuable. Right now, they also essentially suggested, when I shared some of the things that I happen to know that are specific details that maybe not everybody would know, they found it very valuable and have some reason to believe that sharing that with others will be valuable. Now, I am not sure that many people know much about that stuff. And informing people and telling a whole bunch of tales and stories, I'm not really sure that it's educationally useful broadly outside of those people who already know some of the details and have some curiosity. So that opens the door to not necessarily speak about details, but speak in very broad strokes about something that seems consistent with respect to the osteopathic world. A line that I've heard is that if you ask a room full of osteopathic practitioners, say there's 10 osteopathic practitioners, their opinion about something, you'll get 15 to 20 different opinions. So you got 10 people, you got 15 to 20 opinions. The fractionation of the profession amongst subdivided systems, such as treatment systems, be it facilitated positional release, be it LAS BLT, be it muscle energy, which then really includes Mitchell mechanics and sacral mechanics and the Still Van Buskirk sacral model, the Chicago model for the sacrum, visceral craniosacral, or forget craniosacral because that came too late. That's copycatting and expanding upon osteopathy in the cranial field, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of stories with respect to how anything grows and transmits. But the theme that I'd like to point to is that fractionation and the high degree of certainty that people will present themselves with in relation to their preferred fraction of the profession. Even if somebody presents that they kind of like it all, or that you should know it all, and then you should know all of the fractions so that you know the whole, and then utilize them for their specific benefits. So, you should know that this is a strain counter strain situation. This is a patient active direct situation, what have you. So that you should choose and essentially switch between. If you look at Foundations of Osteopathic Medicine, I think it's the 5 models, like the biomechanical model, the fluid-based model, the neurological model, the respiratory model, right? Like, it's just fractionation and thinking about the phenomena that you're identifying and interpreting it post hoc. Post hoc being interpreting after the fact. So post being after and hoc, whatever. If you know your Latin pretty well, then you can, post hoc ergo propter hoc. I don't even know how to properly translate that, but it's kind of thinking after the fact, stuff like that. But you have to know enough Latin, which unfortunately I don't. I understand it well enough because I speak a language that has a lot of Latin. And you do science, you learn a lot of Latin. But you don't necessarily know it as such. You know it, you feel like you know it in English. Anyways, people will present either high degrees of certainty that they're correct about the particular fraction of osteopathy that they like or their preference. They will also present broadly that they've properly assimilated all of these fractions into a united whole, and the way that they talk about it is the best way. Then that turns into whoever else you're talking about and whatever other approach you're talking about, well, they just don't get it. They're not smart enough. They don't understand osteopathy. So I can say from whatever degree of small experience that I have with the profession writ large, I'm pretty sure that I see this phenomenon. Now, because I think it's a phenomenon, I might overlay it on what I see. So it may be more so my interpretation of reality and the experiences that I've had. So I'm happy to be incorrect about that. But there's a large amount of certainty that people have about the profession and about their approach to it and about how they communicate it. And I see this essentially in all directions. Now, I am okay with people suggesting that that applies to the approach that I take and the approach that I take with respect to the Osteopathic Lyceum and the school and whatnot. Because I understand how if somebody suggests that they see a phenomenon and they're part of the larger context that that phenomena occurs in, well, they must be guilty of it too. So I understand how that can turn in my direction. I have some confidence that I'm doing a decent job of avoiding that phenomenon. I think I'm doing a decent job of acknowledging the things that I have some information about, the things that I need more information about, the things that I understand relatively well. There's a track record. You can look through the YouTube channel. You can look through the episodes of this podcast and see some consistency, see that there is information that I'm providing, relating it to things that exist as far as knowledge is concerned, that others have produced, synthesizing that, putting that forward. So there's a term in education called constructive alignment. Essentially, you have a performance goal that you're attempting to inculcate in students, and what you do is design so that you get that outcome. There's another term that I think is probably more useful, especially in a broader scale, and it's validity. Validity is, are you doing what you say you're doing? Simplified. With respect to measurement, are you measuring what you say you're measuring? So I think validity could be maybe a more fundamental concept as a word that people more broadly in academia, in science, in measurement would understand, as opposed to constructive alignment. So constructive alignment is out there. Are you doing what you say you're doing? Or are your educational activities aimed at the outcome goal that you're claiming you want? Now, the outcome goal of osteopathic education would be that somebody can perform osteopathic assessment and treatment effectively and safely. The point of education is to generate an effective novice with the appropriate approach to become an expert. Almost all novices will gain expertise across time with repetition and error and identification of errors that they've committed and learning from those errors. Please excuse me while I clear my throat. But you can maybe set them up a little bit better to do that with how you design your education. So the thing that I probably know more about than other osteopathic educators in a reasonable amount of the profession, I'm sure there's people that have, bona fide educational credentials, especially within health science education or health professions education, that exist also within the osteopathic realm. As it stands, I haven't been looking too hard to see if they exist. As it stands, that means that I don't know if they do exist, which is why I will say, hey, maybe they're out there and I don't know them. I think it's fair to say that I understand education at a level that others may not. I know more. It doesn't mean I know everything. It means I know more. And as a result of that, And the skill set that I was able to gather because of my thesis supervisor, Dr. Sandra Montero, to understand on some level the fundamentals of investigation, the fundamentals of the scientific method, which will include very specific terms. So the terms that really underpin it that most people should know are ontology, epistemology, and axiology. Right? So ontology being a theory of reality or the study of reality, but in science, and again, if you go back, you'll hear me say this years ago, but ontology being in science, the categorization system that you use to describe things and compare them, right? That's its actualized form with respect to scientific investigation. But you need to have an underpinning philosophy. Do you think that ideas are the most real, or do you think that objects are the most real? Something like that. Then on top of that, you'll build an epistemology. Positivism it would fundamentally put forth that there's one reality that can be identified with appropriate experimentation, but one of the issues happens to be the experimenter. Then you have constructivism on the other end of the spectrum that essentially says that ideas are the most real thing and truth is completely dependent on the observer, the environment of observation, and the previous experience of the observer, right? So you've got to sort of put that stuff together. Then axiology is the values and the value judgments of the researcher or the observer, and in this case, you would inform that with your view of ontology and epistemology. Then you also have the principle of parsimony. So the principle of parsimony is the explanation which assumes the least. I can never figure out how to say this without saying explanation first. Okay, it is the I don't know how to do that, especially not on the fly. But essentially, the principle of parsimony would be the view that explains the most and assumes the least, right? So you're trying to make it as straightforward as possible, as explanatory as possible, with as few assumptions to start as possible. The thing about osteopathy is it sucks at parsimony. It's horrible at parsimony. When I assay the profession, the educators, the writers, the researchers, they suck at parsimony. They make a lot of assumptions. One of the assumptions that I've pointed to is something that somebody else wrote in the International Journal of Osteopathic Medicine, and I think it was more commentary. The title was Anatomical Possibilism. So just because the anatomy is there and this is the function of the anatomy, when I touch this, it obviously means that this is the thing that's happening. And when you investigate it, it really doesn't, right? One of the ones that's become a little bit of a pet project for me, well, not a pet project, that's the wrong way to say it, but a favored explanation of how foolishly osteopathic practitioners will try to leverage what they think is scientific explanation and overlaid on what they think they're doing is prone oscillation. So, and I may be misquoting this, so there could be some error. This, I'm almost sure I've got somewhere. I think I've got it in one of the vlogs. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. If I don't, I should figure that out and look it up. But anyways, there's a research paper that is speaking about allostatic load and a particular approach to osteopathic treatment. So one of the things is prone oscillation or rhythmicity, really. So one of my students was interested in prone oscillation. Prone oscillation, in their understanding prior, was supposed to essentially normalize the autonomic nervous system. In most cases, what one would assume or one would predict is that normalizing the autonomic nervous system should show a leveling out in a negative direction or by dropping heart rate and blood pressure in most conditions. If something's going to be relaxing, you would expect to see some degree of consistent drop in, and not large, but some drop in heart rate and blood pressure, because that would say that the person's more relaxed, and it's a proxy measurement for the autonomic nervous system balancing to some degree. And really by balancing, you mean a little bit more parasympathetic, so heart rate and blood pressure drop. So the assumption was that that's what they would see. They did prone oscillation, heart rate and blood pressure went all over the place. And in their research, a paper that was noted was the paper on allostatic load. And the claim that the rhythmic nature of the oscillation did something to motor nerve firing. I think the term is normalized or normalizes motor nerve firing. It might be decrease. This is off the top of my head, so I'm not sharp with that. But the research that paper cited claiming that the oscillatory approach did this, that it did something positive with the nervous system, wasn't primary research from the method they were saying does it. It was, I believe, a Japanese paper, and I think it was on the median nerve, and I think it was a finger. And essentially what happened is the Japanese researchers put somebody's finger in a device, and the device rotated their finger in a rhythmic fashion. Now, the frequency of that rotation, or that rhythm, it was going to be completely held stable because it's a machine. Whereas as a practitioner, the rhythm is going to vary to some degree. There's going to be alterations in that. Maybe you can keep it pretty tight, maybe you can't, I don't know. But if you're going to claim that it's going to do this fancy thing to the ability to deal with allostatic load, you should at least experiment with measures of allostatic load and actually do the treatment that you say you're going to do. They didn't. They went to a paper about the index finger being rotated by a machine, and that was how they made their claim. That's ridiculous. That assumes so much. I have a student who put people on their stomach, oscillated them, and heart rate and blood pressure went all over the place. Now, the pushback could be like, well, we talked about autonomic balancing. So the people whose heart rates went up, well, their heart rate was too low and their blood pressure was too low, so it had to go up to balance. No, kick rocks. Get out of my face. Osteopathy is bad at parsimony. Osteopathy is bad at science. So now when I say osteopathy is bad at science, if you hear me say that in the past, now I can maybe use a better term. Osteopathy is bad at parsimony. It makes so many assumptions about what's happening. The educators make so many assumptions about what's happening, even in the face of information that says this thing doesn't do what you says it does. They don't look for it. You know, everybody's going to have the desire to cherry pick information. They're going to look for the thing and find the thing that meshes better with their current view. So you have to be exceptionally careful with that. It's hard to not do that. You find the information that lines up with what you think you're looking for, and you stop. It is hard not to do that. As a result of that not being something that is culturally embedded in osteopathy, it doesn't happen. So the educators, the practitioners, the researchers, they continue to do this. If you peel back and you find one of the ones that I did, I don't remember what number it was, but I talked about the Traub-Herring-Meyer wave and how, which one did I do that in? I did that a while ago. I hope that's publicly available. That might be part of the curriculum. It's definitely part of the curriculum at the school, but I don't know if I have that video posted. Whatever. The Traub-Herring-Meyer wave. So if you look at how people have cited it, so essentially I take you through, I go to a website, it cites properly something that claims that cranial osteopathy is able to affect the Traub-Herring-Meyer wave. Well, first of all, it's not called the Traub-Herring-Meyer wave. It's the Meyer wave. There's no Traub and Herring anymore. It's the Meyer wave, right? So if you look it up today, look up Meyer wave. What they did, so the person who wrote the website and the article on the website cited properly. They used proper citation. If you go back through the papers that they cited, there's a series of 3 papers. Essentially what ended up happening is you had a patient on the table, a practitioner with their hands on the cranium. You had more or less, it was pretty much a pulse oximeter. There's probably a better term, but it was on the ear. And you had somebody who was pressing E or F on a keyboard. So what would happen is when the practitioner thought they felt cranial extension or cranial flexion, they would just whisper it. So it's like, extension. And then the recorder would press E, and then they'd say flexion. And then what they did is they adjusted the time scale because they thought this would be the delay from the time that it occurred to the time that the practitioner said it to the time that the recorder put it down. And so you've got this time delay. So they said, we're going to shift everything. And look, oh, wow, it lines up. This is very hard to believe. There's major flaws in this, right? Because there's no measurement of what would actually be happening physically to the patient to correlate with the practitioner saying that that was what was occurring. They didn't try to rule out whether or not it was thoracic respiration, and what the person was feeling was muscle tone on and off that connects to the base of the skull at the same rate as thoracic respiration would occur. Right? They didn't try to deal with any of these confounds. The fundamental research is essentially laughable. But by the time you get to the person who wrote the article, they did what they were supposed to do. They just didn't know that they should have checked the assumptions of the primary research. They're not being malicious, they're being normal. So this is stemming again, coming back to the beginning of what I was talking about, from how fractionated the profession is, how people have their preferred fraction of osteopathy, and that, or they say that they got the whole thing, but they teach you how to choose which fraction to use. It didn't start as a fractionated thing. It started essentially as a united concept, and you can describe it however you want. The way that I tend to describe it is fundamentally osteopathy believes that there's a mechanical correlate to health and disease states. There's lots of fancy words that Dr. Still would have used and the early writers would have used. Like them or don't like them, they exist. But culturally, the whole way, osteopathy is very bad at parsimony. Osteopathy as a profession has high degrees of certainty. You see this mirrored in the individuals that are known, that will drive the subculture in whatever area you happen to be in. The appeals to authority that I've heard about specific practitioners who one person learned from or another person learned from are very curious. And then if you poke around and you meet a few more people who have known the same person that you hear somebody speak positively of, you hear another angle on it. With respect to knowledge, knowledge creation, knowledge translation, knowledge transmission, it's not a good culture in osteopathy. There's real challenges. So hopefully what I'm saying is somewhat coherent. Hopefully you get something out of it. My aim is, as much as I am noting that osteopathy is bad at parsimony, osteopathy has a bad culture of knowledge generation, knowledge creation, knowledge transmission, things like that. I'm trying to be respectful by not pointing at individuals and saying, this is an example, this is an example, this is an example. Because it's possible to do, but it misses the point, because it will distract as a shiny object and say, look at this person, blah, 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 blah. Whereas the constant phenomenon isn't the person. The constant phenomenon is a high degree of certainty about a preferred fraction of the profession or a preferred approach to the profession, and just absolutely horrific knowledge generation behavior, and just so much assumption. So as a description that not everybody's going to grab onto because it's a new term to them, you're just bad at parsimony. Like, you're all trash at the principle of parsimony. So I think, in my estimation, the manner in which I am speaking in this particular episode can sound rougher, or maybe closer to how I am colloquially away from the camera, which I'm fine with. But I started out by trying to say I'm attempting to be respectful. So the language may be harsher while I'm saying I'm attempting to be respectful. So you can interpret that in a variety of ways, and I get that. When I say I'm attempting to be respectful, it's because I'm not calling names. I'm not, maybe even that sounds like a silly thing to say. I'm trying to be respectful by not calling any individual any one thing. There's an abstract phenomenon that is consistent between individuals. It just takes on different shapes and different details, and you can like some and dislike others. But the problem with osteopathy, broadly speaking, is that we tend to, as a group, get stuck on small things and miss the big picture, miss the abstract thing. I happen to really like the concept of far transfer, that abstract concept which is consistent between circumstances that is always useful to import learning from a previous circumstance. So problem-solving frameworks, problem-solving schemas. One of the ones that I've seen quoted, it's just running through my head, is causal plots and novels, but basically problem-solving approaches. How do you take the details of a given situation, digest them, and make them useful? All right, I happen to like that. It's the one that I attach to the most. So osteopathy is bad at that too. It's because osteopathy is bad at fundamental things, right? Just so many assumptions. So again, hopefully that's coherent. Hopefully it makes some sense as to where it comes from. I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of people within the profession, and most of them I've had exceptionally positive experiences with. I have noticed consistently across many of these individuals, with literally no malice, they are not trying to be negative at all, but they make so many assumptions and they don't check. It's tough, right? So hopefully you've made it this far. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk again soon.